What if I told you there's a hidden rule book for how men and women connect, and most people never get to read it? The modern man believes a woman wants his love, his promises, and his full attention. But when the moment passes, what truly remains isn't what he said. It's who he was in that moment. What earns her respect isn't a grand speech. It's his inner strength. What makes her stay isn't a logical explanation. It's his ability to stay calm and centered, even when things get difficult. Love without a strong core is just a request. Real power doesn't need to shout to be felt. A great thinker from history never wrote about love stories, but he understood human nature better than anyone. He knew that who controls what people see, controls what they believe. The key is here. A woman often leads by her natural instincts and learned behavior. This is the surface where a man is still asking for simple, clear honesty, while he is looking for a confession of feelings. She is working on the feeling in the room. While he asks for straight answers, she is feeling out the effect he has. How you appear isn't just about looks. It's like a shield of energy. What seems real often moves people more than what is actually real. And the person who governs that appearance controls the interests of those who are watching. This isn't about being mean. It's about getting by. Over many years, the feminine side learned that influence is as natural as breathing. In our bodies, in society, in symbols. A woman reads a mood, adjusts her focus, and uses quiet moments carefully. Strategy becomes automatic. A man gets lost because he mistakes being nice for giving up, mistakes honesty for telling everything, and mistakes strong feeling for truth. He wants a map to follow. She changes the ground he's walking on. He asks for directions. She alters the whole landscape. This game isn't played with the thinking mind. It's played with gut feeling. A famous psychologist pointed to a path men often miss. The feminine operates on a principle that lives in a man's unseen mind and shows him exactly what draws him in and what can overwhelm him. This creates pictures he mistakes for his fate. He kneels before the symbol, not the real person. He calls it love when it's really his own hidden self, asking to be healed. That's why the man who falls to the promise of perfectly clear emotions becomes blind the moment he thinks he sees. What he sees is his own projection. What he gives up is his own command. The direct truth is quiet. While a man looks for emotional fairness, a woman measures value by the effect he has on her and the space around him. Effect is about substance, pace, and self-control. Effect is the way your being changes how people feel when they're near you. The words don't matter when the feeling underneath says everything. And that underlying feeling in the feminine world reads emotional order. What matters isn't what you feel for her, but who you are when you're with her. There's a difference that can break a love story but shows us reality. A man wants to be loved. The feminine respects whoever owns the center of the room. A man wants to be understood. The feminine follows whoever cannot be easily caught. A man asks for guarantees. The feminine moves around whoever can handle not knowing. Notice the pattern that sets up the whole board. The weaker man responds immediately. The average man explains himself. The strong man watches. And quietness does the rest. Not because quietness is a trick, but because quietness that comes from inner peace is a law. The old warning isn't poetry. It's a method. He who wants to be loved will end up being taken advantage of. He who masters his own quiet will be respected. To be loved as a goal creates neediness. To master quiet as your foundation gives you command. The first type looks to others to tell him his worth. The second type is the worth. The first asks for a judgment. The second is the judge. The difference is invisible to those who mix up feeling with rank, but obvious to those who sense the energy field. The feminine, as a natural strategist, works with masks that don't hide. They guide. Every gesture is a direction. Every pause is a check. Every absence is a measure. It's not a secret plan. It's biology turned into an art form. The woman who understands the world doesn't need to shout because she learned to conduct attention. The man who hasn't understood himself raises his voice and loses the room. When he loses the room, he loses the story. When he loses the story, he begs for love. And when he begs for love, he hands over control. This is the angle most avoid because it takes away easy hope and leaves only the framework. What keeps a man's dignity is not the sure feeling of being picked, but the ability to stay whole when the situation tries to break him. What attracts is not the wildness of want, but the calm that controls that want itself. What holds the gaze is not the promise of big emotion, but the lack of neediness. Respect is not a flower you pick with nice words. It's a stone you lift with self-control. Call it raw, call it ancient, it stays true. A woman does not look for someone to tell all her secrets to. She looks for a solid center. She does not look for someone to explain her feelings. She looks for a keeper of rhythm. She does not look for emotional fairness. She looks for emotional structure. And structure isn't explained. It is given off. That's why the game feels uncomfortable. It isn't solved with talking, but with how you carry yourself. It doesn't reward good intentions. It rewards your state of being. If there's a little-known truth, it's this. The right appearance is inner structure, not outer decoration. The appearance that leads is the one born from your core being. The power that doesn't need to be announced is the only one that remains after the first test of wills. The rest is just noise. And noise, in the end, is always a sign of a weak spot. The instinct to choose, the feminine side, tests to measure strength, not love. A woman doesn't test a man because she doesn't trust him. She tests him because she needs to feel the solid weight of his core. Every challenge, every silence, every unclear move is a quiet question. Are you stable enough to handle my unpredictability? It's the ancient instinct of natural selection showing under modern clothes and romantic talk. The surface changed, but the logic stayed the same. The feminine, at its heart, seeks the center it can move around without getting lost. And the man who is not a center gets thrown off to the side. That old thinker said, "People change their minds easily. Whoever does not command respect loses control." This sentence isn't just about leadership. It's about the mind. The feminine test is the field where this is proven. A woman needs to see if a man is steadier than her changing mood, if he stays whole even when she shifts form. Her instinct doesn't look for steadiness in words, but in actions. When a man wobbles, she understands there is no structure. And where there is no structure, there is no respect. Another philosopher saw love as a trick of biology, nature's way to continue life. The feminine test is a tool of that same nature, to measure who has the emotional framework to support the force of life and who will be broken by it. The test is like a practice run of chaos. When a woman challenges a man, she wants to see if he falls apart or holds firm. It's not a thinking game. It's instinctive. And the modern man's error is believing he can win it by explaining himself. Explanation is the end of authority. Every time a man makes excuses, he tries to wash off something the feminine side wasn't even blaming him for. He turns a challenge into a confession. He tries to show he's innocent when what her instinct is looking for is firmness. Innocence is delicate. Firmness draws people in. The man who explains too much is trying to persuade. And the act of persuading is a kind of begging. And whoever begs gives up his power. That old thinker would understand this easily. He knew that he who wishes to be loved will end up being used. He who commands respect will be followed. The feminine test isn't about right and wrong. It's strategic. It's nature's quiet way of deciding who leads and who follows. While the man responds, the woman measures. While he talks, she watches. While he tries to fix the situation, she notes his movement. The test doesn't end when she smiles. It ends when he stays unmoved. That stillness isn't coldness. It's mastery. The man unmoved before the storm is not uncaring. He's aware. He understands that every challenge is an invitation to lose his center, and his power is born in the exact moment he decides not to be pulled. Do not answer manipulation. That is the first sign of real power, because a man who does not react to a woman's emotion shows that he is in charge of his own, and that mastery is what her instinct respects most. See the difference? The man who tries to fix what she feels ends up drowning in the same water he was supposed to cross. He jumps into her emotions thinking he's being caring, but what he shows is that he can be shaken. The man who listens without bending, who watches without making excuses, who answers with his calm presence instead of panic. That man wakes up something stronger than simple want. He wakes up respect. And in the game of connection, respect is the most powerful form of attraction. A woman doesn't test for love. She tests for strength. The strength to stay calm when she challenges. The strength to look without fear when she tries to throw him off balance. The strength to not explain himself when she asks for reasons. Every test is a mirror held up the other way. She wants to see the reflection of his steadiness in the middle of her own confusion. And when she does, she feels something nature programmed into her. A natural respect for emotional strength. That's how respect is born. When a man shows that her feelings do not have power over his. When he becomes a fixed point around which everything can turn without breaking him apart. A woman feels real power not when a man promises love, but when he gives off stability, because stability is the quiet language of strength. That philosopher would say that love is just a pretty shape of a biological process. And he was right. Behind every smile, there's an unseen discussion between instincts. The feminine measures, the masculine provides support. When one gives way, the other leads. And inside this tight, almost ritual balance, the game happens. The man who understands this no longer tries to win. He simply remains. And in a world of quick reactions, to remain is the highest form of power. In the end, the woman who tests isn't looking for someone to blame. She's looking for a center. And the man who reacts to her provocations loses his place. The man who observes them gains space. The difference is simple, but it changes everything. The first type wants to be accepted. The second type simply is, and what simply is doesn't need to be loved. It only needs to exist. Feminine power lives in what is shown and not shown. And the masculine mistake is in demanding total clarity. Modern man wants clear truth, like he wants air. He believes being totally open equals safety. That clarity leads to truth, and that truth will guard him. But the feminine does not work in the land of clarity. It works in the land of feeling and perception. That old thinker already knew people trust their eyes more than their hands. In other words, what seems true matters more than what is true. And it's on this field, the field of appearance, that woman moves with perfect skill, while man trips, trying to find emotional fairness where there's only instinctive strategy. A woman rarely says exactly what she feels. She suggests, she circles, she creates a mood. Her quiet carries more purpose than a man's many words. The pause is a tool. The look is a pointer. Every move, every small shift, every tone of voice is an instrument of invisible power. Woman masters the art of subtlety because subtlety is the natural home of emotional survival. The feminine learned through instinct and experience to shape the environment before the environment shapes her. That's why the man who looks for pure logic in her words walks into a maze with no exit. The map changes each time he thinks he's found the way out. Another thinker said, "Truth is a story we've forgotten is a story." The man who looks for complete clarity in a game of impressions is set up to lose. He asks for plain facts in a field meant to be about symbols. While he hunts for truth like it's a compass, the feminine has already turned the compass into fog. And the error is not in woman. It's in man's belief that talking between men and women should follow the rules of a fair debate. It doesn't. It never has. Because love, desire, and influence do not live in the world of pure reason. The real secret is that feminine power is a kind of theater, and masculine innocence buys the ticket for show. The woman often writes the scene, designs the setting, and controls the pace. And when the man tries to join in with complete openness, he becomes a side character in his own life story. The game doesn't reward total openness. It rewards those who understand performance and act in a knowing way. The woman, on some level, acts out what her instinct tells her. The man, unaware and literal, mistakes a performance for complete sincerity. But subtlety is not lying. It's instinct. The woman who holds back is not being false. She's surviving. It's how nature taught the feminine to move in a world where physical force wasn't the answer. Influence is a refined form of protection. The mind game is a shield. And the man who doesn't understand this setup calls what is strategy something twisted. He reacts with anger because he can't see the intelligence behind the curtain. And all anger, deep down, is a sign of feeling powerless. That old thinker would say subtlety is a form of leadership. Whoever controls appearance controls the rhythm. And woman has understood rhythm since the first look. She knows that what is shown too much loses its value, and what is held back wakes up curiosity. Scarcity is a language of influence. That's why the woman who understands silence becomes magnetic, while the man who demands explanations becomes easy to predict. Subtlety isn't a cheap trick. It's the skill of handling what is not fully said. It's the art of guiding what the other feels without having to explain what you are doing. Man, on the other hand, is often literal. He wants to know what it is. He wants to say what she feels, to confirm what she shows, to pick a clear label. But the feminine is movement, not a fixed label. The man who demands clarity from a woman shows he is still stuck in the need to control. He wants to put the mystery in a box when he should be watching it unfold. He wants to translate the symbol when he should be reading the pattern, because power doesn't live in the speech. It lives in the rhythm, and rhythm is invisible to those who crave absolute certainty. The strategic man doesn't try to decode every word. He watches the pattern. He understands that behavior repeats what speech tries to cover. He knows the glance that looks away and comes back says more than any planned sentence. He sees that silence is not a lack of answer. It's a form of command. The man who sees patterns sees the structure behind the performance. And once he sees the structure, he stops reacting. Because real power is born the moment the performance loses its viewer. There's a tough balance in the dance between what is hidden and what is desired. The feminine creates the mystery. The masculine tries to solve it. But when man stops hunting for clarity and starts to understand the rhythm, the game changes direction. He stops being moved by the performance and starts to shape the story. He stops being the audience and becomes a mirror. And the mirror is the only thing that stops the actor, because the actor only performs while someone is watching. Respect appears when his quiet stops a performance, when his look is so calm that the theater loses its point. A woman doesn't fear the loud, angry man. She is unsure of the man who doesn't react because he isn't playing the game of needing her approval. He watches, and by watching, he becomes the only still point in the middle of the dance. In the end, subtlety is a field where the unaware man gets lost and the aware man finds his place. Because the first tries to understand what was said, the second understands what was meant. The first tries to prove he can be trusted. The second shows he cannot be easily shaken. The first lives inside the theater. The second watches it from a place of quiet. And quiet, in the game of influence, is the highest form of skill. Control is not about beating her, but about understanding the performance and choosing not to step onto the stage. That old thinker wrote that the wise person must act like a chess player who sees several moves ahead. He wasn't just talking about conflict, but about psychology. The man who is master of his own emotional field is the only one who can see the whole board. The rest play by impulse, moving pieces in a hurry, reacting to the last move, forgetting that the real game doesn't happen in actions, but in intentions. In the world of relationships, the woman often makes the first move, not in clear actions, but in the atmosphere she creates, and the common man reacts out of his own need. The aware man, out of understanding, watches. In the emotional game, whoever reacts always loses. A woman challenges to measure substance, to see if a man is run by his impulses or has learned to turn them into control. Every test, every change in mood, every sudden quiet is a move on the board. Most men see this as an attack, but it's a measurement. The woman isn't trying to destroy him. She is trying to know his limits. She wants to know if his center is solid enough to hold her unpredictable energy. And the man who gets thrown off by the first touch proves he is still ruled by the same impulse he says he has mastered. That philosopher saw love as nature's plot against a man's clear sight. The idea is more real than it seems. Nature, in the shape of desire, creates the perfect theater. It makes him believe he's loving when in truth, he's serving a deeper purpose. It convinces him he's choosing when in fact he is being chosen. Love is nature's disguise to keep man in the game. And every time he reacts from pure emotion, he shows that nature still controls him. That's why true control isn't in winning the game, but in stepping out of it with full awareness. You cannot defeat a woman because there is no prize to defeat, only a reflection. The feminine mirrors the man's internal state. When he is chaos, she reflects chaos. When he is order, she organizes around that order. When he reacts, she takes the lead. When he observes, she shows her true self. The man who tries to conquer a woman is fighting against a mirror of his own lack of awareness. He wants to defeat the reflection he himself is making. Real control isn't in dominating the other person. It's in mastering the reflection you create. The final method is simple, but needs maturity. Calm presence, chosen quiet, and constant reading of patterns. It's not about not caring. It's about seeing clearly. The man who watches without reacting doesn't become cold. He becomes unshakable. He understands that every emotional push is an invitation to lose his center, and he says no to that invitation with grace. This kind of presence creates a new feeling because it breaks the cycle of being managed. His quiet becomes a mirror where the game falls apart. The mirror doesn't fight, blame, or beg. It just reflects. And reflection is what the feminine side is most unsure of, because in it there's no story, only what is. That old thinker would understand this point. He'd say that the man who sees moves ahead doesn't rush. He waits and sees. He looks at the board and sees that the most powerful move is sometimes not to move at all. When the other person expects a reaction and doesn't get one, they lose their pace. And pace is control. In the emotional field, it's the same. The man who doesn't answer a challenge takes apart the structure the other side built. A theater needs an audience. And when the audience goes silent, the stage goes dark. That philosopher would call this freedom. The free man is the one who understands nature and chooses not to be pulled by it. He doesn't fight against desire. He guides it. He doesn't run from being influenced. He understands it and neutralizes it simply by not joining in. Leading at this level isn't about forcing. It's about inner peace. It's the strength of someone who doesn't need to control anything for things to line up around him. The man who reaches this state no longer lives to prove his worth, to be loved, or to be feared. He lives in a state of being present. And presence is the top level of strategy. Because the man who is present cannot be predicted, and what cannot be predicted cannot be easily managed. He can love without losing himself, want without falling apart, be involved without bending. He is in the game, but the game no longer touches his core. The final picture is a lion. The lion doesn't need to show his teeth. He doesn't roar to scare others. He watches in silence. His strength isn't in action, but in the knowledge that he could act at any moment. It is that knowledge that creates respect. The lion knows the jungle knows him without him having to prove anything. The man who masters his own inner performance becomes a lion of his own space. Calm, held together, steady. True control is born when man understands that the emotional game doesn't need to be won. It needs to be moved beyond. When he stops looking for victory and starts looking for inner mastery, the whole board changes. He becomes a mirror that reflects everything. The center that nothing shakes. The gaze that stops chaos. And it's in that moment that the woman, without even realizing it, shows respect from the oldest instinct of all. Silent respect for the man who does not react because he's no longer inside the theater. He is the stage, and the world around him finally learns to be still. Power is not in knowing the hidden truth about women. It's in staying clear of its pull. The man who gets to this point realizes something that might feel uncomfortable. The game was never really about love. It was about an order of strength, not social rank, but emotional rank. The feminine tests, uses subtlety, performs, and the masculine that fails to understand this language becomes its captive. But the goal is not to win the game. It's to walk away from it untouched. Because true mastery does not lie in figuring out the secret, but in moving past the need to figure it out. The man who still wants to understand the reason behind every feminine gesture is still controlled by what he tries to study. The man who watches without needing to own the mystery, that man is free. That old thinker said, "He who controls what others think controls the world." And the feminine has always known this. Since the start, woman has known that power isn't brute force, it's perception. Control doesn't live in the action, but in the image that is sent out. Man, on the other hand, has always hunted for solid reality. Woman worked with the power of impression. And impression, when done well, wins over plain truth easily. The little-known truth is this. While man fights for logic, woman guides the unseen. And the unseen in the human game is where real power lives. That later philosopher saw it with cold clarity. He said love is a trick of nature to continue life. But behind that trick hides very old wisdom. Woman becomes a filter of what continues. She does not look for what is morally right. She looks for strength. She does not look for big emotion. She looks for structure. Every test, every subtle move, every performance she creates is a way of measuring how much a man truly is master of himself. The feminine is the mirror that shows a man the truth he tries to hide, how much he still depends on others' approval to feel he exists. Woman, deep down, doesn't break him. She shows how divided he already was inside. The feminine game doesn't create weakness. It simply shows it. And the man who understands this lets go of the need to point a finger. He doesn't blame, doesn't play the victim, doesn't make broad statements. He simply understands, because clear sight doesn't need bitterness. The clear-seeing man doesn't become a person who trusts no one. He becomes someone who sees things as they are. He sees the power dressed up in feminine nature, and sees his job is not to fight it, but to balance it. The masculine and the feminine are two forces of the same field. Chaos tests the solid center. The solid center contains a chaos. And from that push and pull, respect is born. Another great thinker said man must learn to endure truth, not destroy it. And enduring truth here means accepting that the feminine will always work through impression, because impression is her way of surviving. Woman moves through symbols. Man must move through awareness. Woman leads the scene. Man must own the center. Her strength is in subtlety. His strength is in seeing clearly. She changes shape. He must remain. She measures effect. He must be the picture of steadiness. That's how balance comes back. A man's power does not lie in understanding every small detail of the feminine, but in staying unshaken when faced with them. The secret is to stay whole, even when the game tries to get a reaction from you. True power is the calm that makes others unsettled, the quiet that shows what is real, the presence that is weight. When a man refuses to walk on the stage, the theater loses its reason. When he stops looking for emotional fairness, he gains the clear sight of understanding. And when he stops trying to be loved, he becomes respected. That philosopher called this rising above instinct. He doesn't rebel against nature. He simply chooses not to be a slave to it. He understands that desire, jealousy, and the need for approval are just reflections of nature's will trying to use him. When he sees this, he steps back, and in that step, mastery is born. The man who steps away from the emotional game, but stays fully present, becomes the fixed point around which everything turns. When the feminine meets such a man, her behavior changes. Her instinct knows there is no managing possible anymore. The woman who lives by the game does not fear anger. She is unsure of the look that sees everything and doesn't react. The man who watches without being attached becomes the greatest mirror. And the mirror, as said before, is the one thing that worries those who live by impression. She admires and is unsure of him at the same time, because in him she sees what she cannot guide, and respect is born exactly there, in the impossibility of influencing what is already free. That old thinker would understand this final point. The most lasting power is the kind that never has to push itself on others. And the man who has mastered himself has no need to master anyone else. His strength is quiet because it doesn't need proof. His presence is order because it doesn't need an announcement. His look leads because it doesn't look for a yes. It's this energy that rearranges the world around him without him trying. The man who stays clear of the feminine game is not distant. He is in charge of himself. He understands the instinct, respects the subtlety, watches performance, but never walks on stage. He knows that the little-known truth of women is just a reflection of nature's own hidden truth, the will to strength dressed up as love. And now he knows both sides, appearance and core, game and mastery. In the end, power is not in solving the secret. It's in staying clear from its pull. Because a man who masters quiet when faced with being managed, who watches the impression without reacting, who stays whole even when the world tests him, that man has already found what he needs. The lion does not fear the disguise of the animals it watches. It simply observes. And when its silence is heavy, the forest quiets, because a man who has understood the game no longer plays. He creates the rules for what comes next. If this helped you see things more clearly, do me a favor and like this video. It really helps the channel Winds of Thought grow. Thanks for watching.